Moderating our panel today is Richie Hardcore, who is coming to us live from New Zealand, where he grew up in the punk and hardcore scenes, and was a radio host and DJ at Auckland's 95 BFM for 15 years. Richie has conducted interviews with politicians, personalities, and musicians alike, and is now a respected public speaker, MC, and media commentator. Richie, if you want to take it from
thanks.
here.
That's a glowing introduction. I hope I can live up to it. Respected? Maybe I'm disrespected. Depends who's tweeting about me. Anyway, thank you for laughing at my joke. It was a good start. Hey, fun to be here. Like I was, you know, kind of dad joking before we started. It's like a little United Nations of radio promo. We've got yourself in Canada, Sean, and you guys are all in Australia, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. Elizabeth, you've worked for, most of you guys have worked for like big companies and then you've sort of like branched out on your own. But Liz, you started at Sony Music Australia. You were there for 3 years and then you've gone on to launch your own artist management company, ArowAgency, which offers a range of services to help artists achieve their dreams. And you've also got an offshoot of that too now, haven't you?
Yeah, so we've actually just launched a company called Hey Charlie PR. So I suppose ArowAgency was launched as a management company and it organically grew into offering services because we wanted to help every artist, but we can't manage every artist. So yeah, we've separated ArowAgency to remain as artist management, and Hey Charlie PR will focus on publicity and marketing, and we sort of diversified the range of offerings because of COVID. So, you know, we've got budget-friendly offerings and we're kind of changing the traditional landscape of PR as best we can to continue to help artists.
Awesome. We look forward to hearing more about that. But first, let's move to Ryan Rathbone of Grant Broadcasters. Ryan is the group content director responsible for all on-air talent and content teams across 50 plus stations across Australia. That sounds kind of like stressful at times, I imagine. A lot of big personalities to deal with. Before that, he spent 5 years working in New Zealand for the Edge Network and MediaWorks across content and talent. At the 2019 New Zealand Radio Awards, you were awarded Content Director of the Year. So you are kind of a big deal.
Only amongst my friends, but yeah.
and your mum?
Yeah, my mum's a fan. Yeah.
Rad, dude. What keeps you in the industry?
Look, it's a combination. Like I just genuinely am passionate about audio, but radio in particular, and yes, you know, similar to seeing an artist succeed, I have the same joy out of seeing a radio announcer become a personality, become a show, and kind of nurturing them through that for me is really rewarding.
Awesome. All right, cool. Let's hear more about that after we meet our third panelist, Mr. Russell Thomas of Kaos Management. He's like, oh, yo, he's been doing this before I was born. Russell has, I thought you had 30 years in the industry, but you've actually had 40 years in the industry. Is that right?
45, actually.
45! So you literally have been doing this since before I was born. You've been the head of promotion for EMI. You've also launched your own promotion company, Kaos, with a K, not a CH. Yeah.
Get Smart reference, mate.
Do you want to tell people who Get Smart is? Is that as in like...
no, if they don't know, it doesn't matter.
I get it. I get it. It's very good. He works with artists such as Gotye, who wrote one of the saddest songs of all time. And of course, AWOL Nation. Yeah, this is a real like who's who of radio promotion. Thanks for being here, guys.
So, you know, radio promotion's all about mainly Australian independent bands I work with. John Butler Trio has been a client for nearly 20 years. Lime Cordiale, 7 or 8 years. Sheppard, the same. And they've all had, you know, multitude of successes here and globally. And it's been a pleasure trying to help new Australian artists succeed.
I love that. Hey, for anyone who's watching our stream, we're going to take questions end of our panel. So if you've got anything that you want to ask any of our esteemed guests, please use the Q&A function here on Zoom, and hopefully we'll get to some of those if we've got enough time at the end. Yeah, is that cool with you guys? You
sure?
Happy to field questions from the audience. All right, so let's start with this. How did you get into the industry, Elizabeth?
My story kind of starts with, I guess I inherited my love of music from my parents. I grew up in the Midlands of the UK, not far from Birmingham, which I'm sure you all know birthed a lot of amazing bands. My dad is a drummer, and he was actually friends with a guy called Bill Ward. And when Bill Ward started his band, Black Sabbath, it was just a local band. My dad went touring with them. So music has kind of always been in my blood and in my family. When we moved to Brisbane, I sort of immersed myself in the local scene as much as I could. I'd ask my parents questions all the time about what the live music scene was like in the UK when they were growing up, because I wanted to emulate it in some way. So I suppose live music took me to a marketing role in radio. From there, I took a marketing role at a music streaming service, and one of my clients was Sony Music Australia. So when I moved to Sydney, Sony Music asked me to join their digital music team, and I sort of, again, immersed myself in every aspect of the label that I could. There was a guy there called Ian Grady who took me under his wing as sort of one of his in-house alternative music lovers and specialists. So I got to label manage a lot of sub-labels like Pure Noise Records and Century Media, and I got to work across albums from artists that I love, like Architects and Bring Me the Horizon, State Champ, Story So Far, and I got to sit down with Nikki Sixx once from Motley Crue to talk about to talk about a digital strategy for his band 6 AM. So I really was fortunate enough to work in the digital music team and also, you know, publicity and label management for all of these amazing labels and amazing bands. And I knew that eventually I wanted to start a company that put artists first in every aspect of the sense of putting an artist first, and do as much as I could for social change and equality across the board in every way that equality should be represented. So when I met Tam at Sony, who's an A&R wizard, we started ArowAgency. So we started an artist management company, and as I mentioned before, that sort of grew into services offerings as well. So we've just launched Hey Charlie PR, where we do publicity and marketing, and we've kind of taken the blanket PR method and broken it down into step-by-step aspects to make life as easy as possible for artists. So that's kind of me in a nutshell.
Yeah, that's a big nutshell. I like how you're like just casually you were casually hanging out with the drummer of Black Sabbath as a child. That is a great story for any party.
Yeah, I'm lucky. My parents are super cool, so they have a lot of awesome stories from their youth.
Yeah, that rules. You said that you sound like you have a real compassion for like emerging artists and wanting to look after their well-being, I guess, as people as much as the brand. Is that, do you think, because historically agencies haven't looked out for new artists? Yeah,
I mean, working for a major label, you get exposed to a lot of different management teams, a lot of other labels, a lot of, you know, the industry is massive. And I remember when I was little, and I said to my parents from the youngest age that one day I want to work at a record label. And I could see my dad was always like, oh, this is going to be interesting. And he always said, you know, it's a tough industry, but if you're strong-willed, like, you can do it, and you just have to stick to your guns. And I think that I always took that on board, because there's a lot of people that treat artists amazingly, and there's a lot of people that treat them as a money-making marketing machine and try and change and shape them in a way that they don't want to be changed and shaped. So Tam and I witnessed a lot of that through so many aspects of the industry, you know, and so many different companies, and we really wanted to change that and just create a platform of equality, as I say, in every essence of the word equality, and give artists as many opportunities as we can, and educate them along the way, rather than keeping it all to ourselves. And you know, a lot of agencies used to, back in the day, make artists feel like they needed them, but we want to educate artists and empower them, you know, to have the tools that they can use to create their own career and stay strong in what their goals are.
I love that. That's really like aspirational, inspirational.
Thank you.
Wow, no, thank you. Russell, you've obviously seen a lot of changes since you started 45 years ago. What is it that got you into this business? And
Well, a bit like Elizabeth, I knew someone I was working with someone whose husband was the head of promo at EMI, and at the time I had a lot of love for soul music. I was listening to Al Wilson and Gladys Knight. And I still love soul music. There's a Soul Russ playlist up on Spotify of like 5 hours of classic soul that I've put up there if anyone wants to follow it. And I ended up applying for a job as the Tamla Motown label manager. I ended up getting the job and was there and increased there. I was working with Stevie Wonder and broke an artist called Yvonne Fair. And, there was a great catalogue of music, and I did that for a few years. And then I got the opportunity to be a PR guy at EMI in Melbourne. Went there for a couple of years and then left and worked for a management company for a year, and then got hired as head of promo in 81 to come back to EMI in their heyday, between 1981 to 85. So, yeah, I had the joy of working personally with David Bowie on his Let's Dance tour, which is a real highlight. And then when I was working for myself in 87, David hired me to be his liaison on the whole Glass Spider tour of Australia and New Zealand. It was actually quite funny. David played Western Springs in 87, and there was 80,000 people there. I think it's still the biggest outdoor gig that ever was. And if you know Western Springs, a couple of k's up, there's all these houses that look down on the venue. Mm-hmm. And David was on the stage, and he was jerking around that night, when he was doing his songs. And the crowd loved him. And I rang up the manager in New York after the thing, and I said, David seemed to be jerking around a lot. What's going on? And he went, he'd had a death threat. So David actually had a death threat, and someone could have been up on that hill at Western Springs with a 303 and taken a blood shot. So David was not a still target all night.
Oh, yo, that's insane.
Wow.
Why would you send David Bowie a death threat? I thought people were just mean on the internet these days, but
being David who he is, the show went on. He wasn't going to stop it for a threat.
Yeah, right. Wow.
And since then, I've worked with a multitude. I mean, with John Butler Trio in 2001, we had a song that Sebastian Chase at MGM hired me to promote to try and break down. Because in the 90s, if you're an independent band and you didn't have major distribution, you couldn't get played on the radio. And in 2000, Sebastian, in his infinite wisdom, said, if we can create a way of selling the art, of getting the artists to empower themselves. So he had a deal where I actually spent a year trying to get this song played, and then that song, Better Man, got played for a year, and that was the straw that broke the camel's back. Independent music from 2001 then became able to be played on the radio because the independent MGM distributor could have the song available in stores. And now we're at the point 20 odd years later that, it's probably 40 or 50% of the world market, independent music.
I was going to ask you that. You talked about the heyday of EMI. Have record labels really diminished in how important they are for bands?
Well, economically, it's a tough call because, they'll advance you the money to pay for the album and, so you're getting the mortgage on the house, but you never get to own it. So it's it's not a good product.
Yeah.
They also take away a lot of moral rights and creative rights at major labels where, the artist loses the ability to. Sebastian had this thing at MGM that I will make the artists their own marketing company. They can hire independent people and they can control their own destiny instead of being controlled by a major.
So if you're out there watching this and you're not signed, don't worry about it. Ryan, how about you, man? How did you become such a mogul?
Look, I mean, I was just a kid that really loved listening to music, and I won't ever subject people to my poor singing or musical ability.
Hey, this is your opportunity, dude.
So, to impress girls at the Blue Light Disco, I became and then got a job on radio when I was about 16 and in commercial radio, my first commercial radio job doing mid-dawns when I was 16, and became a program director at about 18 just because I happened to be in a little radio station and I'd been there the longest, and they just went, hey, you're it.
So basically you won by default.
Yeah, and then look, I mean, again, you know, it's just very lucky to find something I was very passionate about, and you know, it's 20 odd years in the making, 25 years in the making to now, and I've had a lot of really interesting experiences and some really cool ones, particularly around developing new music and new artists with the labels or with independent pluggers like Russ. You know, when, you know, working for brands like Channel V and Nova and The Edge, where there's an ambition and a need for that brand to be breaking new artists and to be doing that kind of thing, which was really fun. It's a really fun experience to see someone go from you know, kind of not existing in the mainstream audience's mind to unlocking that kind of potential, I suppose, for those lucky artists. Yeah.
You talked about earlier that you liked developing radio personalities as much as helping, you know, artists get exposure and build their brand. Can you speak to that a little?
Yeah, look, I mean, the success of the radio stations isn't reliant upon music as much as it once was. You know, music's available in many different places. It's now just one of the many things that we offer. And don't get me wrong, it's still very important. It makes up quite a large portion of what we do. But generally speaking, the difference between being number one and somewhere else comes down to the personalities on the brand. And, you know, building shows is, you know, a pretty interesting science, because there's a lot of psychology around the people that will work together, helping them navigate. Usually it's people that wouldn't generally, it's like a really dysfunctional rock band when you get it right. And kind of being like a tour manager, you got to keep them together and keep them focused on the thing that's going to make them win. So, yeah, I mean, that's kind of the thing that I find really challenging about what I do. And yeah, music plays a role in that. But yeah, for the radio station, the difference between, you know, being number one or you know, second, third, fourth, you know, really comes down to the strength of your breakfast show at the end of the day.
Okay, cool. That's really interesting, because you have like global tastemakers like Zane Lowe and stuff these days who are really shaping the way we listen to things, huh?
Yeah, look, and there's been some really influential music presenters over the years. Obviously, Zane Lowe's pretty incredible, but you know, depending on the genre of music, I think there's a lot of people, particularly in New Zealand, where it's such a fragmented market. If you are an EDM artist, you know, George FM is just amazing. You know, there's so many really talented, in their own right, really talented DJs and producers on the air there. And if they pick your tune and they're playing it, you're on some pretty sweet playlists around the country as well. And it gets noticed by the likes of Zane as well. Like, he's aware of what they're up to.
What are the differences between, say, conducting business in the US versus Australia and New Zealand? You know, like, I'll put that out to you as a panel. You know, like, are there big differences if you are trying to break into radio?
Look, I can speak for Australia and New Zealand because the two are really different. New Zealand's got so many amazing opportunities because of the fragmented market. So Australia is much more regulated. There's less radio options in New Zealand because there's 20 odd radio stations in Auckland alone. So there's a couple of hip hop stations, and then they're doing different varieties of hip hop. So there'll be one old school hip hop and one kind of new school or whatever. And then you've got a couple of middle of the road pop stations, you know, and then you've got your EDM stations sitting there as well. Your adult hit stations that can break some of those George Ezra's and, you know, those more softer acts as well on the breeze and stuff like that. Australia doesn't have that same diversity, and at the moment, it hasn't got those brands that are probably as exciting in terms of breaking new music, which is fine. It probably more a reflection on where the new music is at the moment, rather than the desire from the companies to be able to do it. It's really driven by the audience, and their passion for it at the minute doesn't seem to be there.
Are there state-by-state differences in Australia as well?
There can be. Russ probably would be a better person to speak to that, I would think.
Do you want to jump in there, Russ?
Well, it's not really. I mean, anything from drive onwards right through till midnight is all network driven now. So, you know, the main differences are your big breakfast shows, and they're probably 3 songs up and 3 songs down in an hour, 6 songs. And unless you're a certified hit, you're not going to be played in those shows. So, you know, we have this thing here where we talk about Australia, New Zealand difference. In April, we introduced a scenario where it has to be 50% Australian. Either if it's an artist, another artist has to be an Australian artist, half of it, or 50% of the songwriting of the song. Previous to that, you could have one Australian member in a worldwide band and it would be classified as Australian content. We also have a scenario where we don't have a regulated content system. Like in Canada, for instance, it's 40% local. We have a thing here where it's 25% local, of which only 25% of that, 6 1/4, can be less than 12 months old. And that goes right through from 6 a.m. till midnight. So up until recently, a lot of the stations were playing their Australian content after 10 o'clock at night with minimal people listening and playing recurrence. So until we get a regulation for local content that's enforced, me and Mark Pope and Michael Chugg and Andy Van went down to Canberra last December and lobbied the Labor government, who were very keen to instigate this, to, you know, certify this list. But unfortunately, Labor didn't get in, and, you know, so we're still in abeyance. Right. I think Labor made the big mistake of telling people over 50, of which a third of our population is over 50, telling them they're not going to mess with their superannuation. They're never going to get in doing that.
Yeah, right. But yeah. Hey, you know, you said like you kind of have to have a name for yourself ready to get on the radio. Where do emerging artists get radio play? Because here in New Zealand, artists like Lord or 660 or The Naked and Famous have started at the radio station where I used to, you know, a little alternative radio station called BFM, you know, and they'd get local airplay and that would grow and grow, and then they sort of like take over the country and then they move offshore. How does that work in Australia?
The world now is so small. I mean, it's all organically. You look at what's going on, you know, from tones breaking or semi-organically with the help of Triple J, and Nova in Brisbane were the first to play her first song. And then you've got like Flower Kid and a new artist called Mia Ray, and you've got, you know, Kid Leroy. All these kids are really exciting, and they're all breaking out of organic, you know, through streaming services. So,
I like that Kid Leroy. He's uplifting.
You know, I think from what I was told, Sony signed him when he was 12 and he moved to LA. And, you know, so all these things are happening behind the scenes. These artists are developing, and, you know, then they're all taking, to a certain extent, control of their own destiny.
Mm. If you're in a heavier band, Elizabeth, because you talked about, you know, some of the metal bands that you've worked with or alternative bands you've worked with, is there a space on radio?
I mean, there's a show called Short Fast Loud on Triple J, and Josh gets to kind of curate that himself. So it's not, you know, Triple J is they have music meeting and it's kind of like a team decision as to what gets played, and the host can to an extent play, you know, what they want to play on their show, but Josh gets to curate the whole show himself. So you could literally send him a Facebook message and say, hey man, do you like this track? And if he likes it, he'll play it. So he's amazing. He's an amazing driving force in the Australian heavy scene, but there's not too much, to be honest. I mean, for all of the emerging bands that we work with, community radio is the starting point. I think the unfortunate thing about Australia at the moment is that Triple J, whilst they're a great station, they have a lot of say. So you go from community and then you go to Triple J, like, you know, generally speaking, and then you go to commercial. So for heavy bands, there's not too many places to go after Triple J. There used to be a show on Triple M that played heavy music at night time. But yeah, I mean, in terms of emerging artists of all genres, I think Australia, it's really difficult. You know, we've had campaigns for our bands in the US and the UK where it's easier to get radio play because there's more stations, as you guys were saying. And in Australia, it's just such a small market. I mean, you've got legends like Jake Powell from the Hit Network in Brisbane that doesn't really put too much of a focus on how much of a name an artist has. If he loves the song, he'll do his best to play it, you know, and seed it into like Saturday, Sunday mornings and see if he can grow it from there. But yeah, it's difficult for all
Jake's
emerging
no longer
artists.
there now.
Yeah, which
Jake
is a shame.
was made redundant. Shame.
Oh.
It is a massive shame because he did a lot. But yeah, so yeah, for heavy bands, it is quite difficult. We don't really have any dedicated you know, stations, so it's kind of streaming is a big one for them to focus on. And then you've got, you know, Unified Gathering that took the place of Soundwave. So in terms of radio, it is quite difficult.
Yeah, Soundwave was a good festival. Like,
it was amazing.
It blew out financially, right?
It did, yeah. AJ made a few decisions that made it difficult for him to continue the festival, but he did amazing things while it was running.
Yeah. Bands in Australia, I mean, speaking, like, we're on the topic of heavy music, like Amity Affliction, Parkway Drive, is it that they've become huge, they've like outgrown the border of Australia and then they move overseas? Or do you think bands need to go overseas, make it there and then come back? What's the equation there?
There's a lot of times where we have even been told with our non-metal bands, you know, go and see if you can make it in the UK indie scene and then come back. And
sure.
It's I hate to say it, but we're probably not the only country that suffers with this, but Australia suffers with tall poppy massively. So it's hard. I mean, you kind of have to prove that you can make it somewhere else to then get love in your own country. But I mean, Parkway and Amity, they jumped on a lot of, I can't remember his last name now, Marco. He did a lot to help those bands in Europe. So they kind of made a name for themselves in the US and Europe, and they had a lot of connections with you know, bands in those regions as well to make their mark. But yeah, definitely, I remember Parkway were massive in the local scene, but they just couldn't really seem to crack it in the big festivals until they went overseas.
Sure.
And then they started getting headline stages.
What do you think about in the New Zealand context, Ryan? Do you think that bands need to make it offshore before they can really truly be accepted here, or vice versa?
No way. I think I think the New Zealand scene is so special, and if I was a New Zealand artist, I would be best mates with everyone at New Zealand on Air, like yesterday. I'd be calling Jeff Newton, and I'd be getting him to hear all of my stuff. I'd be asking him for his opinion on how to craft my career and where I should be taking my music and how I should, you know, even to the point of who I should be working with and what producers I should be using. It's just such an amazing resource that I wish was available in Australia for my Aussie mates, because you know, the amount of funding that they give artists and allowing them to be you know, true to their music and independent. I just think it's really wonderful, and it's a really fortunate thing. It's probably in lieu of having a Triple J. This is, you know, it also ensures a pathway that they invest quite a lot of money in commercial radio over there, buying airtime to create pathways for artists to break. So it's actually a really, yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of things that I really like about what New Zealand on Air do, and they are absolutely fantastic. And I think that's why the music scene there, really per capita, is extremely strong. There's some amazing acts coming through there. But yeah, and you can be signed to a label and still get their funding, They'll fund your singles, your videos. They'll help you with all sorts of things. It's pretty incredible. They'll rep your record at radio. There's a whole lot of things that I think is just, I think it's really, really amazing actually what they do.
Do you have government support for emerging artists in Australia, Russell?
There is some grants you can apply for individually for, $5,000 or $10,000 to do various things, to tour and record. But New Zealand also is an important place for Australian acts to tour. I mean, Lime Cordiale, as Ryan would know, have been in The Edge before and done Edge TV, and they've played shows and they've built up organically like they have with their whole audience around the world over the last 8 or 9 years. I remember being in New Zealand a few years ago when Sheppard supported Justin Bieber over there. I mean, it is a place where you need to go, and it's like anywhere, even in Australia, if you're from Sydney and you go to Perth and you go all the way across to Perth and you play, people will come. You don't go there, they're not going to come. So you have to work the markets that you're investing in. You have to go and play live. And the whole thing about Australian music globally is that most of the Australian bands are better live than they are on record. This is the whole thing. They've had to cut their teeth to a live audience to gain support and to build their market. So, that's one thing that we'll always have over a lot of acts around the rest of the world. And in my experience, I've been doing acoustics with Butler Trio and Sheppard and Lime Cordiale in radio stations up and down the East Coast and all over Australia for the last 8 or 9 years. And when you can get a song and an artist that can strip a song back to an acoustic guitar and it still works, you're on a winner.
You're making me really miss being a radio host. I'm thinking of people playing acoustic in our shitty little studio. Anyway.
We used to go out with Sheppard and Jay would be on an acoustic guitar and George would be on a cajon and Amy would be the shakers. And we played everywhere, man. We would play their cocktail parties. We'd do their lunchtime. I would go in with donuts at morning tea and sushi at lunch, and we'd just go and play to staff. And if 3 people liked them, they'll tell another 3 people. Obviously, in the last 7 months, we haven't had an opportunity to do that. And that's greatly missed because I think that interaction with the artists and the radio people is everything.
Yeah, it really is. I think what you're talking about is that there is a real human element to the whole equation, huh?
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're talking about touring as well, Russell. Bands can't do that right now. I know a lot of bands make more money off merch than they necessarily do off
Well, Lime Cordiale, interestingly enough, did 20 socially distanced shows at the Oxford Arts Factory with 80 people a show, all spaced out, and sold them out, and did the same thing in Brisbane. So there is a lot of socially distanced things happening here. BMA did it as well at the Factory Theatre, where they did 4 or 5 sold-out shows, all spaced out. So, there's ways around it.
Okay. What about you, Ryan? How do you think artists can make a sustainable living in music if they're not touring or not touring as much?
Look, I think I think there's a need, particularly in Australia and New Zealand, to get people socializing again and doing all that stuff. I think we've been in lockdowns and bits and pieces. So there's some really cool shows up here on the Sunshine Coast where they were like drive-in shows where you drive your car into. So that's your bubble. You drive in, you watch the bands play, you drive out.
That's sick. I would have hired a minivan.
Yeah, it was kind of mildly successful. I don't know. I mean, I think, we're talking about creative people and I think there will always be a hunger from the audience to see their favorite acts live. As Russ touched on, a lot of the Australian artists, that's actually the best way to engage with them because there's so much more to it. You fall in love with them, and I know as a programmer, in fact, Russ, you've used that on me. I'll fall in love with an artist because I've seen them play in our boardroom, and you get that they can do that. And I guess the other thing is, as a radio programmer, I go, okay, you know what? If I make that kid a star and I choose their song and I work it really hard, they might come and play at our outside broadcast, or they might come and do this thing for us later on, as opposed to the artist that lives in America that can't do that for us. And, you know, I know in New Zealand, I definitely took that stance with a few artists where we only had so many places on the playlist. So I went with the kid that could come and play the shows for me when we needed him to. And that kid, Mitch James, is probably one of the biggest artists in New Zealand now. You know?
I'm not sure what the COVID restrictions are in Australia state by state, because we're back, like bands are touring, like they're in mosh pits again here. Like,
oh wow.
Oh yeah, I don't know if you know, like Blind Spot. They're one of our biggest, longest running metal bands. They're like doing a national tour, and there's
wow.
of everyone all mushed up against one another. Is that?
Yeah, we're not there yet.
You're not there yet? Okay.
Well, we do have an ARIA initiative, which has got 1,000 shows going around. That's going to happen at the end of the year, which ARIA behind across a lot of major artists. So
we've got small shows in Sydney. Like we had an artist that played a small show in Sydney, but we're not back to massive crowds or mosh pits or anything like that yet.
Right. Do you think if bands do, how would you encourage artists who kind of on the cusp of living off their music, but then, you know, the situation's changed due to COVID? How would you encourage them to, like, I guess, hold fast rather than give up and go work in the mall?
Well, we actually had an initiative here in Australia that it was called Isolate Festival, and it launched at the start of lockdown. And so every Saturday and Sunday, it was just back-to-back bands, like, but pretty much for 24 hours or 48 hours across the weekend. And that really helped a lot of bands sell merch. And I think that the great thing about Australia is we might have a small, you know, radio landscape, but our fans, and it's similar to New Zealand as well, our fans really do get behind their favorite artists. So I think coming up with initiatives for merch, even if you can't afford to front the merch, you know, to buy the merch to start off with, you could do pre-orders. So that's what a lot of artists have been doing, you know, put your pre-order in for merch, and then with that merch pack, you get a signed poster or a signed CD, or you get everything signed. And it's just, artists are just sitting at home, so you may as well sign a couple hundred, you know, things to go in a package. So I think it's just kind of not ignoring the traditional ways of making money and figuring out how you can use it to your advantage during COVID. We have also had a couple of our artists that have been paid to do performances for different outlets. So they've had advertisers that have backed, you know, a performance initiative, and they've gone into a studio where it's been socially distanced. You know, there's only been 5 people in the production, and they've performed for a fee. So I think, yeah, there's a lot of different outlets that are supporting artists as best they can in terms of keeping the live music as active as we can in these times.
Without people like getting mortally ill.
Yeah, exactly.
When it comes, I guess you kind of semi-answered that, but when it comes to helping artists achieve sort of their goals with, I'm kind of sick of the phrase new normal, but I'll just say new normal. Has that changed how you've had to work, like, drastically? In terms of promotion, yeah. So that was kind of the backbone of the launch of Hey Charlie, is that, you know, artists had lower budgets, or outlets had, you know, a lot of outlets had, sorry, there's a garbage truck behind me. A lot of outlets had writers that had to go and get part-time jobs. And so there was less opportunity to actually get a feature in an online blog. So we massively had to change the way that we even looked at publicity and marketing. And a lot of the time it might be, okay, let's not charge you for a publicity campaign that might not get you a lot of results. Let's really focus on social media and put together an engagement strategy and focus on that area, so that when the writers are coming back to the blogs, your social media is so glowing that they have to write about you. So it was, really changing the whole shape of publicity. And in terms of management, again, it was just finding ways that we could keep the artist busy, you know, whether it was live streaming a show or doing more live Q&As with fans, or doing merch bundles where we could, and just, keeping as busy as possible, but keeping the fans engaged. That was the main thing, is making sure that the artist was still talking to the fans and the fans still knew that they existed. Do you guys think that's the same, Russell and Ryan, that artists have a big, I guess, role in keeping that engagement with the audiences through social media? Or do you think there are alternative ways to keep fans
I've seen some artists actually boom from this whole experience. There's an artist in Bundaberg by the name of Brendan Egan, and every single Saturday night when people were in lockdown, he decided to do a 5-hour live.
5 hour.
Yeah, he did a 5-hour live performance every Saturday, and you could tip him and whatever. And I'm pretty sure there was a little bit of money made, but it probably would have covered the lighting rig and whatever. He did a gig. He did a gig in a different venue throughout Bundaberg. All of which, by the way, at the end of COVID, have invited him back to play, and obviously paying him for it. So while he was there, he was interacting with his fans. The streams ended up getting pretty large, like in the tens of thousands kind of thing, and it became quite a big deal. And the Today Show, the big TV show, happened to be in Bundaberg for whatever reason, and they'd heard about him, so they got him on to perform on their TV show, which would never have happened had he not been kind of hustling like he was. And he got all the other musos that he could involved in his shenanigans. So they'd all come on and play for half an hour with him or whatever, and they'd do some duets, and they'd take requests and whatever it might be. But by the end of it, it's pretty incredible. He managed to kind of finish COVID on a better note than he'd started, in terms of the amount of gigs that are coming his way, people wanting him to be their wedding singer and so on and so forth. It's pretty cool for an emerging act, and someone that has had some radio success, but largely is still plugging away and working really hard at it.
Have you seen stories?
We had a great promotion with Sheppard recently with one of Ryan's stations on the Gold Coast, Hot Tomato. Obviously the planes weren't flying, and Bags came up with this idea, his drive time announcer, that we should do a show on the runway. So Sheppard actually played a show on the runway and did it live streamed on Facebook and Insta and stuff, and had like 130,000 people watch it. And that was a great success. And Lime Cordiale have been doing YouTube fan fests and all those sort of shows. And Sheppard have actually playing on just got announced yesterday as the halftime entertainment at the AFL Grand Final, which will probably go to millions of people all around the world. And they get to do a couple of songs there as the sole underlights entertainment. So that's going to be a big deal for them. So there's 2 independent artists that are actually got stuff going on in this COVID time.
Yeah, that's huge. Hey, when it comes to promotion, is it still important for artists to get into like old school print media, like music magazines and newspapers, or is it all about blogs and social media now?
I've never dealt with
a bit of both.
Bit of
both.
I was just going to say it's just a bit of, I think it's a bit of both. I mean, one of our artists, Lupa J, they've been featured across print and blogs. I think it definitely still has its place. Obviously online is bigger, but I think we're still in a world, and it might be different in New Zealand, but we're still definitely in a world where I think it's best to cover every touch point where you can, especially street press where it still exists.
The interesting story, my end, when I did David Bowie's Let's Dance tour, we had what we affectionately called a hostility room, but it was a hospitality room. And David would have this pre-show where he would invite radio who played his songs, retail who sold his records, and no press, they sold papers. So it got to the point where when I finished up at EMI in 85, I thought if it's good enough for David Bowie, it's good enough for me, because he just saw papers were not part of his career. So I have never dealt with press, apart from a couple of online magazines. I've never dealt with press in the last 35 years. Okay,
right. What about you, Ryan? Did you have a take on that?
Look, I mean, again, it's like I'll get music will come to us in various different ways, I suppose, and sometimes it's your mate annoying you with a song that they really like, and that's cool. As I said, you fall in love with an artist because you see them at a showcase, or Russ has brought them around with some sushi, and kind of you feel obliged to eat his sushi, so you stand there. you know, there's various different things, and you know, sometimes you know, that might be, you know, someone might go, hey, you know, here's a song we'd like you to have a listen to, and they happen to include a couple of press snippets, and you happen to be reading it while you're listening, and that might keep your ear for a little bit longer, checking out that particular act. Yeah, I mean, when I was much younger, I'd go and buy all those magazines because I was influenced by them. They don't really come past my desk that much anymore, but some of the snippets do, you know.
Sure. We're coming to an end, actually. This has passed really quickly. This has been real fun. Just quickly, like, I've really enjoyed moderating and chatting with you three. So I hope everyone watching this is having a nice time and getting some useful insights as well. But before I move into some viewer questions, if you're talking with a young artist, what are 5 major components that should always be in a promotions campaign when working with a record or a single? This is open to all of you.
Well, the first one would be build your market or build your audience. Find a way of interacting with your audience and building your market, because in this world of streaming and incremental downloads of your songs and incremental streaming, every time you get a new person that tells another person, it's adding to your potential. And that potential, and also for any new artists, try and link yourself on Spotify and Apple with like-minded artists so that, you know, you can tap into their audience to help build your growth. That'd be the most important one from my point of view.
I like that. It's really collaborative.
Yeah.
Elizabeth? I have a little saying that content is king and engagement is queen. So you need your content. If you're doing a video shoot, get your behind the scenes. If you're doing a photo shoot, get behind the scenes content. Everywhere you go, get as much content as you can so that you've always got a content library. Even if you're not on tour, you've got things to promote and post on social media, and engage when you post. Don't just post and close your Instagram or close your Facebook. You know, engage with the comments, engage with the people that like your page, engage with similar artists on, you know, streaming platforms, as Russell said, so that you can manipulate the algorithm as much as you can, because that's kind of what we're working with these days.
That's a tricky one. With the engagement thing, I see like super famous people dealing with some horrific online trolling though, saying, fuck, your song sucks, you're not who you used to be anymore.
Yeah, that's
right.
Tough.
Like, I like the old stuff. It's you know what
that's hard. Ignore those people.
Ignore those people.
The good ones.
Okay. All right. So just on to the next.
Yeah.
Ryan?
When you're building yourself as an emerging artist, though, you need to do the engagement.
Okay, sure. But when you're huge, you can ignore people. Is it the golden rule?
Yeah.
All right, I'm into that. I want to be huge, so I can just ignore people. Ryan, any like key components people should include in their promotions campaigns?
Yeah, look, I just have to echo everything that was said. Really, the social media stuff's really important. You know, and it may not necessarily be the lead singer or whatever, but if someone has a great personality, that's helpful too from a marketing perspective. It's like if you've got someone that's a larrikin, that's a bit of a laugh and always up for it, then you know that person should be kind of in charge of your social in a way. You know, they should be the one driving the content, just as you'd make someone responsible for the marketing if they were really good and they understood that. You know, it's one of those things. It's just like if you've got someone in your band, it could be the drummer. Maybe they're amazingly funny. Let them go. 660 in New Zealand. While all the guys are good chat, Chris, the bass player, is really good chat. And you know, he's always doing bits on TV and other little bits and pieces, which just builds the profile of the band and further exposes them to the audience. So yeah, if you're lucky enough to have one of those personalities in your group, then put them forward.
Okay, that's great. I think it's really helpful. Hey, look, we've got a couple more minutes. I'm going to just field some of these questions that we've received online. Is that cool with you guys?
Sure.
All right. I'm sorry, dear listener, I apologize if I mispronounce your name, but Rian Gael asks, to Russell, what are your comments on Lime Cordiale dominating this year's ARIA nominations?
Yeah, I just got a text in saying they got 8 nominations. It's just totally organic growth. the fact that the band have done every hard yards, you know, up until 18 months ago, they hadn't been played on Triple J only a couple of times, and now they've had their last 5 or 6 songs across the board. Earlier this year, Dre London came to town, who's Post Malone's manager, and he came to it and he was impressed. He flew up to Byron Bay and saw the boys and came back and did a deal for the US with Post and him. Have got a label called London Cowboys, and they've done a deal in America now, and that's got the NMF on in the USA. And, you know, all of this, as I said, it's been, I think even when Chuggy went and saw them years ago and he walked into this gig and there was 200 girls at this gig, and, you know, when there's 200 girls, eventually there's going to be 400 guys. And they've just built organically from that. Apart from having a great live show, they're just great guys, and the 2 brothers, Ollie and Louis, are driven. You know, they're total star. They're full-on stars, and they're great, you know, great people, great band.
Okay, thank you. David Gertina asks, if you could be instrumental in putting together a new supergroup, who would you love to see work together on a project?
I would never do it.
That's
You'd
a
never do it?
question.
Do you remember that? Does anyone remember that album Judgment Night? It was a whole
No.
bunch of like, oh, yo, now I'm just showing my age. It was a whole bunch of like hip hop artists and metal artists working together. Like, not new metal, but like it was a
Oh, no
crossover
way.
between like very famous for the era. Anyway, it doesn't matter.
That sounds good.
It was a good time. I'll send you a
Yeah.
playlist. Okay, did you have any takes on that, Liz?
I think it would have to be an amalgamation of like old school and new school. So like, I'm going to say Nikki Sixx would have to be in it because he's God. And then have some newer artists. Like I'm going to be biased here and say Luca J because their production is incredible. Yeah, I reckon a super group would have to be old and new for sure.
What about you?
As long as Nikki Sixx is in it, I don't care.
What about you, Ryan?
Look, I always got a kick out of seeing, I'm just going to go along the Motley Crue theme, seeing Tommy Lee playing Bangarang on the last tour while he was spinning upside down was pretty cool. So as long as Tommy Lee, maybe Skrillex, they could do something pretty cool.
Oh,
maybe,
yeah, Tommy Lee and Skrillex mashup.
That would be sick.
That would be sick. Larry Grimes asks, how does a new artist compete with the labels on Spotify?
I think that's an easy one, to be honest. I mean, Spotify have done amazing things to make it accessible for artists. And I don't think a lot of people realize this, but Spotify prioritize a lot of independent artists over labels where they can. I mean, they want to be responsible for discovering artists. It's part of their team KPIs. But when you deliver music to Spotify, there's a dashboard. And it's, if you go to artist.spotify.com, you can update your profile picture, put your bio in, put merch links in. But the most important thing that every artist needs to know is that you can actually pitch your song to the editorial team of Spotify. So you don't need to be in a label to actually access the editors of Spotify for your playlist to be featured in for your song to be featured in a playlist. So yeah, I think it's really easy to compete with labels on Spotify because they're making it really accessible.
Okay.
Just one point on that too. I think, you know, the whole New Music Friday thing, which has been probably earlier this year, everyone's going, I got to get on New Music Friday. And every Friday I'd go for an afternoon walk and I'd try and get through the 50 songs. And if you're number 35, you know,
you're done.
You're done.
Yeah.
So it's actually better off being on Friday Fun Day or Poppin' Fresh or Just Chill, or you're actually better off with a playlist edition than you are being number 40 on New Music Friday.
Yeah, sure.
Sometimes that can be a detriment, and you know, a lot of people will do what they can to get that, but I just think playlists are way more important than that.
Yeah, they do genres and moods really well. So like if you just want office tunes or hip hop chill or whatever, there's a playlist for every mood, every genre, and the every pitch that goes through the Spotify dashboard, the editors look at that, and if it's not fit for New Music Friday, they might think, oh, this is good for office chill, or this is good for Monday motivation. So yeah, you're right, Russell, there's so many other playlists to get featured in.
I have some pretty crazy moods. I'm going to see if I can explore them.
Do it. That's a challenge.
Soundtrack for my mental health.
Yeah.
One more. Rose Mueller asked us several questions. Thanks very much, Rose. But she asked, one of those questions is, how do you decide which artists are ready for your services, or in Ryan's case, radio engagement? Because you've all worked with some like big ass names. Like, do you guys listen who you work with?
Well, I do. I only pick a song I think I can help with. There's, if anyone would know the stats, there's 40,000 songs released a day, 280,000 a week, 14 million a year.
Wow.
And, the playlists are very limited. So if I think I can help and add something of value to it, I'll get involved, but otherwise I'll pass.
We're the same. We listen to every song. If we like the song, we'll work with it. If we don't think it's PR or radio ready, then we'll see if we can help them with social media. But yeah, we have to believe in the music to be able to take it on board.
Right. Sorry, but it's just like, you must hear some fucking terrible songs.
Everyone's art is subjective.
We can send them to you, Richie, if you like.
maybe I'll start like a Kook Slams of song playlist. You know what I mean? Do you know
yes.
that? Yeah, right. It's just like the worst crash. No, I wouldn't do that. Social media should be a positive space, and I would hate to be like, this is, because you're right. It is subjective. Like someone's bad song might be someone else's favorite joint. Yeah.
I've listened to a song and loved it, and Tam has been like, "Oh no, this is not for me."
But of all those songs that come out in Australia, the radio stations here are probably only getting, Ryan might be able to back me up on this, 100 to 120 via Play and PE each week out of that 280,000. So there is a very big filter that's applied to what gets to radio here.
Okay, so hey, this is a Play and PE conversation. Like, what is it? The quality of the song that will get it on Play and PE, which will then distribute it?
Well, Play and PE will show you who's downloaded it and who's streamed it, but you don't know who's played it.
Okay, right. Ryan?
It's giving you a barometer of, a feeling of how the song's reacting initially.
Sure.
Yeah.
Ryan, do you want to have the last word here? Because we're about out of time.
Yeah, sure. Look, I mean, again, you don't get to play every song you like. The radio stations are a business, and there's an audience that they're trying to hit. So depending on the station target, what the playlist needs, you could have an amazing hip hop song, but unfortunately, we have our quota of hip hop songs, and we're actually looking for diversification of our playlist, and we really need a mainstream rock track, or we really need something. We're looking for a particular genre, so something might be sitting on the bench for weeks and weeks and weeks before we get to add it, because we just haven't had the room for that particular genre or that style of music. And other really great songs miss out just because they don't fit what we've created in terms of our radio brand. People wouldn't expect to hear System of the Down on a pop station. It just wouldn't happen. But it doesn't mean the System song's shit. Like, Serge has probably done a great job. So yeah, so do I. So this is the thing. It's not necessarily, there's an element of personal taste and wanting to believe in the artist. And as I said, Russ and various other people have done a really great job of selling acts to you. But they kind of come in knowing what will fit on the format as well. So they kind of have already narrowed that down for you too. So yeah, I don't know. I think I've answered it.
Yeah, no, nailed it.
A final word from Richie about all the songs that are released. Cream will always rise to the top.
Mm.
Yeah, right. Okay, I like that. If it's good, it's gonna go somewhere positive.
Yeah.
Dope. I love that. Hey, this has been really fun. I've had a really good time. Which is basically why I do things if I like it. I'm into it. Liz, Russell, Ryan, thank you so much for sharing with our audience. I mean, you guys have got so much expertise and experience, and you also you can communicate it well. A lot of people know stuff, but they're not particularly articulate. But you guys are all good with your language. So I think everyone who listened today would have got a real benefit from it. And Godspeed. I hope to do this again sometime.
See you, Richie.
Awesome.
Take care, mate.
Thanks,
all right.
Thank you.
Bye.